the icy water of the Verd River tore at Zara Ellis's wedding gown as she fought against the raging current, her lungs burning with each desperate gasp for air. Just moments ago, she had been standing beside the man. Her father had arranged for her to marry a man whose true nature revealed itself only after the ceremony, when he discovered she had no dowry to give him. In a rage, he had dragged her to the river's edge and shoved her from the bank, her cream silk dress billowing around her like a shroud as the ruthless waters of the Arizona Territory claimed her. It was 1878, and Zara had believed that at 22 her life was finally beginning. Instead, as the current pulled her under once more, she realized it might be ending. "Help!" she screamed when she broke the surface, her voice barely audible above the roar of the river. The spring melt had turned the normally placid waters into a deadly torrent, and each time she managed to claw her way to the surface, the current dragged her back down. The heavy fabric of her wedding dress had become a watery prison, weighing her down and tangling around her legs with each desperate kick. Miles upstream, Blake Adams pulled his stallion to a halt at the sound of distant screaming. The 30-year-old cowboy had been tracking a lost calf from his small ranch, but something in that desperate cry made him abandon his search immediately. He urged his horse toward the river, following the sound until he spotted something white thrashing in the water. "Good Lord," he muttered, realizing it was a woman. Without hesitation, Blake dismounted, tied his horse to a nearby tree, and rushed to the riverbank. The woman was being swept downstream fast, her pale dress billowing around her like a ghost beneath the surface. Blake ran alongside the river, keeping pace with her as he searched for a place to intercept. When he spotted a bend where the river narrowed, he knew it was his only chance. Blake tore off his boots, gun belt, and hat, then waded into the freezing water. The current immediately tried to knock him down, but he braced himself against it, digging his feet into the riverbed as he extended his arms. "Grab my hand," he shouted as the woman approached. Zara was fading, her strength nearly gone when she heard a man's voice cutting through the roar of the water. Through blurred vision, she saw a tall figure standing in the river, arm outstretched. With her last burst of energy, she reached for him, her fingers brushing his before the current pulled her away. Blake lunged forward, diving into the deeper water. The cold shocked his system, but he kept his eyes on the white fabric now sinking beneath the surface. With powerful strokes, he swam toward her, fighting against the raging current until his hands found the sodden material of her dress. He grasped the fabric and pulled her toward him, wrapping one strong arm around her waist as he used the other to swim toward the shore. The journey to the bank felt eternal, the river fighting him for possession of the woman in his arms. When his feet finally touched the bottom, Blake stood and hauled them both toward dry land, carrying the near-lifeless woman in his arms. She was deathly pale, her lips blue from cold, her wedding dress torn and mudded. Once on shore, Blake laid her gently on the ground. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, brushing wet strands of dark hair from her face. When she didn't respond, he pressed his ear to her chest, relieved to hear the faint but steady beat of her heart. Blake turned her onto her side, patting her back firmly until she coughed, water spilling from her mouth. She gasped, drawing in a ragged breath before coughing again, more water emerging with each painful spasm. When she finally opened her eyes, Zara found herself staring up at a stranger with intense blue eyes and dripping wet brown hair. His face was tanned from the sun with a strong jawline covered in stubble. He looked like salvation itself. "You're alive," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Barely," Zara whispered, her voice raw. Blake looked down at the bedraggled bride in his arms, noticing the bruises forming on her wrists and the terror still lingering in her eyes. Something protective and possessive stirred within him, a feeling he'd never experienced before. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Zara couldn't answer, fresh tears mixing with the river water on her face. Blake stood, lifting her effortlessly in his arms. "Don't worry," he said, his voice a solemn vow as he gazed down at her pale face. "You're mine now. No one will hurt you again." In her half-conscious state, those words registered as both a threat and a promise. Zara wanted to protest, to explain that she belonged to no one, but exhaustion claimed her, and she slipped into darkness, her head falling against the stranger's chest. Blake carried the unconscious woman to his horse, somehow managing to mount while holding her securely against him. He arranged her across his lap, one arm firmly around her waist to keep her from falling as he guided his horse away from the river. His small ranch was about an hour's ride, and he hoped she would survive the journey. As they rode, Blake studied her face. Even pale and drawn, she was beautiful, with high cheekbones and full lips. Her dark hair was beginning to dry in the afternoon sun, revealing hints of auburn. She was wearing a wedding dress, which meant she was somebody's wife, or was supposed to be. But the bruises on her wrists and the fact that someone had thrown her into the river suggested that whatever marriage she'd been part of was no true union at all. Zara drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride, occasionally opening her eyes to find herself pressed against a stranger's chest, the steady rhythm of a horse beneath her. Each time, before panic could fully form, exhaustion pulled her back under. Blake's ranch was modest compared to some in the territory, a small cabin with a barn and corral, nestled in a valley with good grazing land and access to water. It wasn't much, but it was his, purchased with 5 years of savings from working cattle drives. As he approached his ranch hand, an older man named Joe came out to greet him. "Good Lord, Blake, what happened?" Joe exclaimed, hurrying to help as Blake carefully dismounted with Zara still in his arms. "Found her in the river. Someone tried to drown her," Blake said grimly. "Take care of Thunder for me, will you? I need to get her inside." Joe nodded, taking the reins of the horse as Blake carried Zara into the cabin. Inside, he laid her on his bed, then quickly built up the fire in the hearth to warm the room. Zara was still in her wet clothes, which Blake knew could be deadly after such exposure to cold water. "Madam," he said, gently touching her shoulder. "Madam, you need to get out of these wet clothes." Zara's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding them before recognition dawned. "The river," she whispered. "Yes, madam. I pulled you out, but you're still in danger if you stay in these wet things. Do you think you can change? I have a shirt and some trousers that might fit you if we roll up the legs." Zara tried to sit up, but dizziness overtook her and she fell back against the pillow. "I can't," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Blake ran a hand through his hair, considering his options. Propriety dictated he shouldn't undress an unconscious woman, especially one in a wedding dress, but leaving her in wet clothes could kill her. "Madam, I'm going to have to help you. I promise I'll be as respectful as possible." Zara nodded weakly, too exhausted and cold to argue. Blake retrieved a knife and carefully began cutting away the sodden wedding dress, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible while he worked. The task was made more difficult by the multiple layers of the gown and the fact that the fabric kept sticking to her skin. When he finally removed the ruined dress, he quickly wrapped her in a blanket before removing her wet undergarments, replacing them with one of his clean shirts. Throughout the process, he maintained as much of her dignity as possible, though he couldn't help noticing the extent of the bruising on her arms and back. By the time he finished, Zara was shivering violently, her teeth chattering as her body fought to warm itself. Blake added another log to the fire, then prepared a cup of hot coffee with a generous splash of whiskey. "Drink this," he said, helping her sit up enough to sip from the cup. "It'll warm you from the inside." Zara grimaced at the taste but drank obediently, the burning liquid spreading warmth through her chest. When she finished, Blake eased her back down and piled more blankets on top of her. "Rest now," he said. "You're safe here." Zara wanted to ask where here was, who he was, and what he had meant when he said she was his now. But exhaustion claimed her once more, and she drifted into a fitful sleep. Blake watched her for a moment before stepping outside to speak with Joe. The older man was waiting by the corral, concern etched on his weathered face. "How is she?" Joe asked. "Alive, but not much more than that," Blake replied. "Joe, I need you to ride into town and fetch Dr. Mitchell. Tell him it's urgent." Joe nodded, already moving toward the barn. "What happened to her?" "Don't know the full story yet, but she was wearing a wedding dress. Someone threw her in the river to die." Blake's jaw tightened. "When she wakes up, I'll find out who and they'll answer for it." Joe gave him a searching look. "Be careful, Blake. You don't know what trouble might be attached to her." "Doesn't matter," Blake said firmly. "No one deserves what was done to her." As Joe rode off toward the town of Verde Springs, Blake returned to the cabin. Zara was still sleeping, though her breathing seemed more regular now. He pulled a chair up beside the bed and settled in to wait, determined to be there when she woke. Hours passed, and night fell over the ranch. Blake dozed in the chair, waking occasionally to add wood to the fire or check on Zara. It was just past midnight when she began to stir, whimpering in her sleep as nightmares plagued her. "No, please," she murmured, her head thrashing from side to side. "I didn't know. Please don't." Blake leaned forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe," he said softly. "It's just a dream." Zara's eyes flew open, wild with fear until they focused on Blake's face. For a moment she didn't seem to recognize him, then clarity returned. "The river," she said, her voice hoarse. "You pulled me out." Blake nodded, relieved that she remembered. "Name's Blake Adams. This is my ranch about 20 miles south of Verde Springs." Zara attempted to sit up, wincing at the pain in her muscles. Blake helped her, propping pillows behind her back for support. "I'm Zara Ellis," she said, clutching the blanket around her. "Or I was. I suppose I'm Zara Blackburn now, though I doubt that marriage counts if the groom tries to murder his bride hours after the ceremony." Blake's expression darkened. "Your husband threw you in the river," Zara nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Harold Blackburn. My father arranged the marriage. He's a banker in Prescott, and Harold was one of his clients. Father thought he was wealthy, but it turns out he's deeply in debt. When Harold discovered I had no dowry to bail him out, Her voice broke. "He said if I was worthless to him alive, at least my death might earn him sympathy from his creditors." Blake's hands clenched into fists. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. After he pushed me in, I was fighting so hard to stay above water that I lost sight of him. He probably returned to tell everyone I fell in accidentally." "Well, he won't get away with it," Blake said firmly. "As soon as you're well enough, we'll go to the sheriff." Zara shook her head, panic flashing in her eyes. "No, you don't understand. Harold has connections. The sheriff in Verde Springs is his cousin, and my father." She swallowed hard. "My father made it clear that if the marriage failed, I would no longer be welcome in his home." "So you have nowhere to go?" Blake asked gently. Zara looked down at her hands. "No. I have an aunt in San Francisco, but I have no money to get there, and even if I did, Harold might follow me." Blake was quiet for a moment, considering. "You can stay here," he finally said. "At least until you recover and decide what to do next." "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," Blake interrupted. "I have the space, and it's the decent thing to do." Zara studied his face, searching for ulterior motives but finding only genuine concern. "Why would you help a stranger this way?" Blake shrugged. "My mother raised me to believe that a man's character is judged by how he treats those who can do nothing for him in return." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Besides, I already told you you're mine to protect now." There was something in the way he said it, not possessive, but protective, that made Zara's heart beat a little faster. Before she could respond, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she pressed a hand to her forehead. "You should rest more," Blake said, rising from his chair. "The doctor will be here in the morning to check on you." "Where will you sleep?" Zara asked, suddenly aware that she was occupying what was likely his only bed. "Don't worry about me. I've slept in worse places than my own floor." As Blake moved to leave, Zara called out, "Mr. Adams." He turned back. "Blake," he corrected. "Blake," she repeated softly. "Thank you for saving my life." He nodded once, a small smile touching his lips before he moved to make his bed on the floor near the fire. Zara watched him for a moment before settling back against the pillows. Despite everything, despite the terror and pain of the day, she felt oddly safe in this stranger's home. As sleep claimed her once more, her last thought was of strong arms pulling her from the raging waters, and a voice promising that she was his now, a promise that, against all reason, she wanted him to keep. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the cabin's windows. Zara woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings until memories of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up carefully, her body aching from her ordeal in the river. Blake was nowhere to be seen, but she could hear movement outside, the sounds of ranch life already in full swing. She glanced down at herself, blushing when she realized she was wearing only Blake's shirt, which fell to mid-thigh. Keeping the blanket wrapped around her, Zara swung her legs over the side of the bed and attempted to stand. Her knees buckled immediately, and she had to grab the bedpost to keep from falling. The cabin door opened, and Blake entered, carrying a bucket of fresh milk. He set it down quickly when he saw her struggling. "Whoa there," he said, crossing to her side and helping her back onto the bed. "You shouldn't be up yet. I need to use the—" Zara felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. Understanding dawned on Blake's face. "Of course. Let me help you to the outhouse. It's just behind the cabin." He found a pair of his trousers and helped her pull them on over his shirt, rolling up the legs so she wouldn't trip. Then, with one arm around her waist and her arm over his shoulders, he guided her slowly outside. The morning air was crisp and clear, the sun casting long shadows across the small ranch. Zara took in the modest cabin, the well-kept barn, and the small corral where several horses grazed. Beyond that, rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains. It was beautiful in a rugged, untamed way, so different from the prim streets of Prescott where she had grown up. After helping her to the outhouse, Blake gave her privacy, waiting nearby but out of sight. When she emerged, he was there to help her back to the cabin, where he had prepared a simple breakfast of coffee, biscuits, and bacon. "You should eat," he said, helping her to a chair at the small table. "Get your strength back." Zara nodded, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing appetite as her body demanded fuel after its ordeal. "The doctor should be here soon," Blake said as he poured her more coffee. "Joe rode into town last night to fetch him." "Joe, my ranch hand. Good man. Been with me since I bought this place 3 years ago." Zara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Have you lived in Arizona Territory long?" Blake nodded. "Born in Texas, but came west after the war. Worked cattle drives for 5 years, saved every penny until I could buy this place." A hint of pride entered his voice. It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine. It's lovely, Zara said sincerely. Peaceful. A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their breakfast. Zara found herself studying Blake when he wasn't looking the way the morning light caught in his brown hair, the strength evident in his shoulders and hands, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face. She quickly looked away when he caught her watching. "We should talk about what happens next," Blake said, his expression turning serious. "If your husband, he's not my husband," Zara interrupted firmly. "Not in any way that matters," Blake nodded. "If Blackburn believes you're dead, you might be safer that way, at least for now. But eventually, you'll need to decide whether to bring him to justice or make a new life elsewhere." "I have no means to do either," Zara admitted. "Everything I owned was in my trunk, which is probably still at the hotel in Verde Springs where we were to spend our wedding night." Blake considered this. "I could ride into town, see if it's still there. That's too dangerous. Harold might see you or someone might mention that you were asking after my things." "Then what do you propose?" Zara bit her lip. "I need time." "Time to recover and think clearly about what to do next." "You have that here," Blake assured her. "Stay as long as you need." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Blake moved to the window, then relaxed. "It's Joe with the doctor, Doctor." Mitchell was a balding man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He examined Zara thoroughly, checking for broken bones and signs of internal injury. "You're a lucky young woman," he said when he finished. "Another few minutes in that river, and we'd be having a very different conversation. You have some bruising and mild exposure, but with rest and proper care, you should recover fully." "Thank you, Doctor," Zara said, relieved. The doctor packed his bag, then turned to Blake. "A word outside, if you don't mind." Blake followed him out, closing the door behind them. Through the window, Zara could see them talking seriously, the doctor gesturing occasionally while Blake listened with a grave expression. When they returned, Dr. Mitchell addressed Zara directly. "Mrs. Blackburn, Miss Ellis," she corrected firmly. The doctor's eyebrows rose, but he continued. "Miss Ellis, I feel I should inform you that there are rumors in town about a bride who tragically fell into the river yesterday. Her husband is quite distraught, according to accounts." Zara's blood ran cold. "What is he saying?" "That you were walking along the riverbank after your ceremony, slipped on some loose stones, and were swept away before he could reach you. He's organized a search party to look for your body downstream." Blake's jaw tightened. "That's not what happened." "So I gathered," the doctor said, glancing between them. "I make no judgments, but I thought you should know the story being told." "Will you tell anyone you treated me here?" Zara asked, fear evident in her voice. Dr. Mitchell shook his head. "Doctor-patient confidentiality is sacred to me. As far as anyone needs to know, I rode out here to treat a ranch hand with a fever." He turned to Blake. "But you should be careful if Blackburn discovers she survived." "He won't," Blake said firmly. "And if he comes looking for trouble, he'll find it." After the doctor left, promising to return in a few days to check on Zara's progress, an uneasy silence filled the cabin. Zara sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing with the implications of Harold's search. "He's covering his tracks," she said finally, "making sure no one suspects him when my body is found." "Except your body won't be found," Blake pointed out. "Eventually, he'll have to accept that the river carried you away. Or he'll start to wonder if I survived," Zara countered. "Harold is many things, but he's not stupid. He might expand his search." Blake knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Zara, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued, "I meant what I said yesterday. You're under my protection now. If Blackburn comes anywhere near this ranch, he'll regret it." The intensity in his eyes made Zara's breath catch. Here was a man who had known her less than a day, yet was willing to risk everything to keep her safe. It was so different from her father's cold dismissal when she had objected to the arranged marriage, from Harold's cruel calculation of her worth in dollars and cents. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Blake seemed taken aback by the question. "Because it's right," he said simply. "Because no one deserves what he did to you." Something in his direct gaze told Zara there was more to it than that, but she didn't press. Instead, she squeezed his hands. "Thank you for everything." The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Zara grew stronger, gradually able to move around the cabin without assistance. Blake taught her the basics of cooking over an open hearth, a skill her privileged upbringing had never required her to learn, and she proved a quick study. Joe, a weathered man with a kind smile and few words, brought her books from town to pass the time while Blake tended to the ranch. A week after her rescue, Zara ventured outside for more than just necessary trips to the outhouse. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. She sat on a bench Blake had placed outside the cabin door, watching as he and Joe worked with the horses in the corral. Blake was a natural with the animals, his movements confident but gentle as he broke a young colt to saddle. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the quiet words he spoke to the nervous horse, the patience he exhibited even when the animal balked. When he finished the day's training, Blake spotted Zara watching and walked over, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "Enjoying the sunshine?" he asked, sitting beside her on the bench. "Very much," Zara replied. "I've never spent much time on a ranch before. It's fascinating." Blake smiled. "Different from town life, I imagine, in every way possible." Zara looked out at the open land surrounding them. "In Prescott, everything is about appearances and social standing. My father's entire existence revolves around being seen with the right people, living in the right neighborhood, wearing the right clothes." "And you?" Blake asked. "What does your existence revolve around?" The question caught Zara off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. What she wanted, what mattered to her. She had always been her father's daughter, expected to fulfill the role assigned to her without question. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been allowed to find out." Blake studied her for a moment. "Well, now's your chance." That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Zara found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since her rescue. "When you pulled me from the river," she began hesitantly, "you said something. You said I was yours now." Blake looked up from the saddle he was repairing, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "I remember." "What did you mean by that?" He set the saddle aside, considering his words carefully. "In that moment, seeing what had been done to you, knowing someone had tried to take your life. Something in me just snapped. I felt responsible for you, protective in a way I've never felt before." He paused. "I didn't mean to claim ownership, if that's what you're thinking." "I wasn't," Zara said softly. "I was just wondering if you meant it, about keeping me safe." "Every word," Blake said without hesitation. "For as long as you need." Their eyes held across the small space, something unspoken passing between them. Zara felt her heart quicken, aware that the air in the cabin had somehow changed, becoming charged with possibility. The moment was broken by a knock at the door. Blake rose immediately, hand moving to the gun at his hip as he approached the entrance cautiously. "Who's there?" he called. "It's just me," Joe's voice came through the door. "Got news from town." Blake relaxed and opened the door, admitting the older man who stamped his boots on the threshold before entering. Joe nodded a greeting to Zara before turning to Blake. "Blackburn's called off the search," he reported. told everyone the river must have carried his bride all the way to the Colorado by now. There was a memorial service yesterday. Zara felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. So I'm officially dead. According to the good people of Verde Springs, yes, Joe confirmed. But there's more. Blackburn's been asking questions about ranches in the area, specifically about anyone who might have found something or someone in the river recently. Blake's expression hardened. He suspects she survived. Seems that way. He's offering a reward for information. Zara stood, her legs shaking slightly. It's not safe for me to stay here. I'm putting you both in danger. Nonsense, Blake said firmly. This changes nothing. If anything, it means you definitely can't leave now. He'd find you on the road for sure. But what if someone talks? What if Dr. Mitchell won't say a word, Joe assured her. And nobody else knows you're here except me and Blake. Blake placed a hand on Zara's shoulder. We'll be more careful, that's all. No trips into town for any of us for a while. Joe can stay with his sister in Verde Springs and keep an ear to the ground. Let us know what Blackburn is up to. Joe nodded in agreement. Already arranged it. I'll head back tomorrow, stay in town until things cool down. That night, after Joe had gone to sleep in the barn and Blake had made his usual bed on the floor, Zara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The knowledge that Harold was actively searching for her had rekindled the terror she'd felt in the river. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel the cold water closing over her head, hear Harold's voice telling her she was worthless. A soft sound escaped her somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and immediately Blake was beside the bed, concern etched on his face. Zara, what's wrong? She shook her head, unable to speak through the tears that suddenly overwhelmed her. Blake hesitated only a moment before sitting on the edge of the bed and gathering her into his arms. Zara buried her face against his chest, her tears soaking his shirt as he held her, one hand stroking her hair gently. It's all right, he murmured. Let it out. You're safe here. Eventually, her tears subsided, but Blake continued to hold her, his presence solid and reassuring in the darkness. I'm sorry, Zara whispered, embarrassed by her breakdown. Don't be, Blake said, his voice gentle. After what you've been through, you're entitled to a few tears. Zara drew back slightly, looking up at him. In the dim light from the banked fire, his features were softened, his eyes dark and intent on her face. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingertips. You're a good man, Blake Adams, she said softly. Something shifted in his expression, a hunger quickly controlled, a warmth that had nothing to do with kindness. For a breathless moment, Zara thought he might kiss her, and even more surprising, she realized she wanted him to. Instead, Blake carefully disentangled himself from her and stood. Try to get some sleep, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Things will look better in the morning. As he returned to his makeshift bed on the floor, Zara lay back against the pillows, her heart racing. What was happening to her? Less than 2 weeks ago, she had been forced to marry a man she barely knew and did not love. Now, here she was, having feelings for another stranger, a man who had saved her life. Yes, but still someone she was only beginning to know. Yet something about Blake felt different. There was a steadiness to him, an integrity that she sensed went bone deep. When he looked at her, she didn't feel like property or a burden or a duty. She felt seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in her life. With those thoughts swirling in her mind, Zara finally drifted off to sleep. For the first time since her ordeal in the river, her dreams were not of drowning, but of strong arms holding her close, keeping her safe from harm. The next morning, Joe departed for town with instructions to send word if Blackburn's search came too close to the ranch. Blake spent the day showing Zara around the property, teaching her about the daily operations of ranch life. Despite her upbringing in town, Zara found herself fascinated by the work, the care of the animals, the maintenance of the land, the self-sufficiency required to survive in the territory. "You're a natural," Blake commented as he watched her feed the chickens, the birds clustering around her eagerly. Zara laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise them both. "Hardly, but I'm enjoying learning." She scattered the last of the feed, then dusted her hands on the borrowed trousers she wore. They were Blake's, cinched tight at the waist and rolled up at the ankles, but far more practical than any of the dresses she'd worn in her previous life. "We should get you some proper clothes," Blake said, noticing her adjusting the two large garments again. "Can't have you tripping over my trousers while you're doing chores." "These are fine for now," Zara assured him, "though I admit I miss having a dress sometimes." She paused, then added with a small smile, "Just not a wedding dress." Blake returned her smile, relief evident in his eyes at seeing her joke about her ordeal. "I could ride to a different town, maybe Flagstaff, buy you some things that fit." "That's too dangerous," Zara protested. "What if someone recognizes you? Flagstaff is a good 3 days' ride from here. No one there knows me." Zara considered this. "Perhaps I could go with you. I've been cooped up here for nearly 2 weeks now." Blake shook his head firmly. "Too risky. Blackburn might have spread word about you to other towns." "But everyone thinks I'm dead," Zara argued, "and I could disguise myself." She touched her long dark hair, which had begun to curl as it dried in the sun. "Cut my hair, perhaps, dress as a boy." Blake looked skeptical. "No offense, Zara, but you'd make a mighty unconvincing boy." His eyes traveled briefly over her figure before he quickly looked away, a flush rising to his cheeks. Zara felt her own face heat at his implicit compliment. "Well, perhaps not a boy, but I could at least alter my appearance. And I need to start living again, Blake. I can't hide on this ranch forever." The moment she said it, Zara realized it was true. As safe and comfortable as she felt with Blake, she couldn't spend the rest of her life hiding from Harold Blackburn. Eventually, she would need to build a new life for herself, one of her own choosing this time. Blake seemed to sense the determination behind her words. "All right," he said after a moment. "We'll go to Flagstaff, but we'll be careful, different names, different story." "We could be brother and sister," Zara suggested. Blake's expression changed subtly. "No," he said, his voice low. "Not brother and sister." There it was again, that unspoken something between them, a current as powerful as the river that had brought them together. Zara felt it like a physical touch, sending warmth spreading through her body. "What then?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Husband and wife," he said, the words both a question and a statement. "It would be the safest cover. No one questions a married couple traveling together." Zara swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. "Yes," she agreed. "That would be practical." Blake nodded, though his eyes suggested practical was not the word he would have chosen. "We'll leave in 2 days. I need to arrange for someone to watch the ranch while we're gone." As he turned to go, Zara called after him. "Blake," he looked back. "Thank you for understanding that I need this." His expression softened. "You're stronger than you know, Zara Ellis. Much stronger than anyone's given you credit for." The 2 days of preparation passed quickly. Blake rode to a neighboring ranch to arrange for their stock to be tended in his absence, returning with the news that the rancher's son, a trustworthy young man named Thomas, would stay at the cabin until they returned. Meanwhile, Zara set about altering her appearance as best she could with limited resources. She couldn't bring herself to cut her hair, but she braided it severely and pinned it close to her head. Blake found an old hat of Joe's that would help shade her face from view, and she practiced walking differently, holding herself in a way unlike her usual posture. The morning of their departure dawned clear and bright. Blake had packed supplies for the journey: food, bedding, a small tent, and trading goods to exchange for the items they needed in Flagstaff. Thomas arrived early, a cheerful young man of about 19 who seemed thrilled to have temporary responsibility for the ranch. "Everything's set," Blake said as he secured the last pack to the second horse he'd prepared for Zara. "You remember how to ride?" Zara nodded. She had learned as a girl, though it had been years since she'd been on horseback. "I'll manage." Blake helped her mount, his hands strong and sure on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. The contact, brief as it was, left Zara feeling flustered in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness about the journey. They set out as the sun crested the eastern hills, heading north toward Flagstaff. Blake set an easy pace, mindful of Zara's inexperience and the need to conserve the horse's strength for the long journey. They rode side by side when the trail allowed it, talking easily about the landscape, the weather, the plants and animals they encountered. By midday, Zara's muscles were protesting the unaccustomed activity, but she said nothing, determined not to slow their progress. Blake, however, seemed to sense her discomfort. "We'll stop up ahead," he said, pointing to a stand of cottonwood trees near a small creek. "Rest the horses and ourselves." The shade of the trees was a welcome relief from the Arizona sun. Blake helped Zara dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. "Saddle sore?" he asked with a sympathetic smile. "Is it that obvious?" Zara grimaced, trying to massage feeling back into her thighs. Blake chuckled. "Everyone gets it when they're not used to riding. It'll ease up after a few days." He spread a blanket on the ground in the shade. "Sit. I'll see to the horses, then we'll have something to eat." Zara sank gratefully onto the blanket, watching as Blake efficiently unsaddled the horses and led them to the creek to drink. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, confident yet gentle, especially with the animals. She found herself imagining those hands on her, not just supporting her as she dismounted, but caressing her, drawing her close. She shook her head, surprised by the direction of her thoughts. It was inappropriate to think of Blake that way, wasn't it? He was her rescuer, her protector, her friend. Yet the more time they spent together, the harder it became to ignore the growing attraction between them. Blake returned with their saddlebags, sitting beside her on the blanket and pulling out bread, dried beef, and apples for their meal. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the soft nickering of the horses and the gurgle of the creek. "Tell me about your life before," Blake said suddenly. "In Prescott. Were you happy there?" Zara considered the question, realizing no one had ever asked her that before. "I don't know if happy is the right word," she said slowly. "I was comfortable, safe. My father was strict but not unkind. After my mother died when I was 12, he became more focused on his business and less on me. I had my books, my few friends, my small rebellions that he never noticed." She smiled faintly at the memory. "I used to sneak out to watch the sunset from Granite Mountain. It wasn't much of a rebellion, but it was mine." "And the marriage, how did that come about?" Zara's smile faded. "Harold began banking with my father about a year ago. He presented himself as a successful businessman from California with plans to expand into the Arizona territory. He was charming, well-dressed, seemingly prosperous. When he expressed interest in me, my father saw an opportunity for an advantageous match." She plucked at a blade of grass, avoiding Blake's eyes. "I objected, but father insisted it was time I was settled. I had few options, no money of my own, no relatives who would take me in against his wishes. "So you agreed," Blake said, his voice gentle. "I agreed," Zara confirmed. The ceremony was small, just my father, Harold, the minister, and a few of father's business associates. No one asked if I was entering the marriage willingly. She looked up at Blake then. Afterward, when we checked into the hotel, Harold received a telegram. He wouldn't tell me what it said, but he became agitated, began drinking heavily. When I went to unpack my trunk, he demanded to know where my dowry was hidden. When I told him there was none, that my father had never mentioned a dowry. She trailed off, the memory still painful. Blake's jaw tightened. "That's when he hurt you," Zara nodded. "He was furious. Said he'd only married me for the money he thought my father would provide. When I tried to leave the room to find my father and ask what was happening, Harold dragged me out of the hotel. He said if I couldn't pay my way with money, I'd pay with my life. He took me to the river." Her voice broke. Blake reached out, covering her hand with his. "You don't have to talk about it." "No, I want to," Zara said, drawing strength from his touch. He pulled me to the edge, telling me how he would return to the hotel, how he would tell everyone I had wandered off, fallen in by accident, how he would play the grieving husband while he looked for a wealthier bride. She met Blake's eyes, her own clear and steady now. Then he pushed me in. "The current was so strong I couldn't fight it. I thought I was going to die." "But you didn't," Blake said, squeezing her hand. "You survived." "Because of you," Zara said softly. "You saved me." Their eyes held, the moment stretching between them like a tangible thing. Blake's gaze dropped to her lips, and Zara felt herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force beyond her control or understanding. The wicker of one of the horses broke the spell. Blake cleared his throat and released her hand, rising to his feet. "We should get moving if we want to make good distance before nightfall." Zara nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the interruption. As Blake helped her to her feet, she wondered if he felt it too, this growing awareness, this deepening connection that went beyond rescuer and rescued. They rode until dusk, making camp in a protected hollow near another small stream. Blake efficiently set up the tent for Zara, then prepared a fire while she arranged their bedding. The domestic nature of their tasks felt oddly intimate, as if they had been traveling together for years rather than a single day. After a simple dinner of beans and bacon cooked over the fire, they sat side by side, watching the flames dance in the gathering darkness. The night air was cooling rapidly, and Zara found herself moving closer to both the fire and Blake for warmth. "Cold?" Blake asked, noticing her slight shiver. "A little," Zara admitted. Blake rose and retrieved a blanket from his pack, returning to drape it around her shoulders. As he did so, his fingers brushed against her neck, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Better?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. Zara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Blake sat beside her again, closer than before, their shoulders almost touching. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about what happens after Flagstaff." Zara turned to look at him. "What do you mean? You said you can't hide on my ranch forever, and you're right. Eventually, you'll need to build a new life somewhere." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I could help you get to San Francisco, to your aunt. You'd be safe there, far from Blackburn." The thought of leaving Blake, of never seeing him again, created an unexpected ache in Zara's chest. "Is that what you want?" "For me to go to San Francisco?" Blake stared into the fire. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is your safety, your happiness." "It matters to me," Zara said softly. "What you want matters to me, Blake." He turned to her then, his expression so vulnerable that it took her breath away. "I want you to stay," he said simply. "With me. Not because you need protection, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to be there, because you might Feel something of what I'm feeling." Zara's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "And what are you feeling?" Blake reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm feeling like a man who pulled a woman from a river and found his whole life changed in an instant. I'm feeling things I never expected to feel, things I don't have pretty words for." His hand cupped her cheek. "I'm feeling like I meant what I said that day, that you're mine now, not as a possession, but as my heart's choice." Tears welled in Zara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I feel it too," she whispered. "This connection between us. It frightens me sometimes how strong it is, how quickly it grew." "Does it frighten you now?" Blake asked, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. Zara shook her head. "No, right now it feels like the most natural thing in the world." Blake leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Zara closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening as they gave in to the feelings that had been building since that first day by the river. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer as the blanket slipped from her shoulders, forgotten. Zara's hands moved to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, their foreheads resting against each other. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you opened your eyes in my cabin," Blake admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Zara smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I've wanted you to do that since the moment you carried me out of the river and declared me yours." Blake chuckled, pressing another soft kiss to her lips. "I still can't believe I said that, it just came out." "I'm glad it did," Zara said, "though I still think we should clarify what it means." "It means," Blake said, taking her hands in his, "that I want to court you properly. Not as a pretend husband on this journey, but as a man who hopes to earn your affection and trust. It means that when you decide where your future lies, I hope you'll choose to share it with me." Zara's heart swelled with emotion. After a lifetime of having choices made for her, of being valued only for what she could bring to a man, here was someone offering her the freedom to choose, asking only for the chance to be chosen in return. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like that very much." Blake's smile was radiant in the firelight. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then we have an understanding, Miss Ellis." "We do indeed, Mr. Adams." They sat together by the fire a while longer, talking softly of small things, enjoying the new awareness between them. When the fire began to die down, Blake reluctantly stood. "You should get some rest," he said. "We have a long ride ahead tomorrow." Zara nodded, though she was reluctant to end the evening. "Where will you sleep?" "Out here by the fire," Blake said. "The tent is for you. You could." Zara began, then faltered, her courage deserting her. Blake's expression was tender as he helped her to her feet. "Not yet," he said softly, understanding her unspoken invitation. "When the time comes, I want no shadows between us, no pretense of being married for safety, no uncertainty about your feelings or mine. When that time comes, I want it to be a beginning, not an ending." Zara nodded, touched by his consideration. "Good night, then," she said, rising on tiptoes to press a light kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Zara," Blake replied, his voice a caress in the darkness. In the privacy of the small tent, Zara touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the imprint of Blake's kiss. For the first time since her ill-fated wedding day, she felt truly hopeful about the future, a future that now, against all odds, seemed bright with possibility. The journey to Flagstaff took 3 days, each filled with the growing closeness between Zara and Blake. They rode side by side when the trail permitted, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their disappointments. At night, They camped beneath the stars, their conversations lasting late into the evening, punctuated by increasingly passionate kisses before they reluctantly parted to their separate sleeping arrangements. By the time they reached the outskirts of Flagstaff, Zara felt as though she had known Blake for years rather than weeks. There was an ease between them, a natural rhythm to their interactions that spoke of deep compatibility. "Remember," Blake said as they approached the town, "as far as anyone here knows, we're Mr. and Mrs. Blake Anderson, recently married and traveling through on our way to California." Zara nodded, adjusting the hat that partially obscured her face. "You think it's safe?" "Flagstaff is growing fast. Lots of new faces passing through. We'll keep to ourselves, get what we need, and be on our way." Blake reached across the space between their horses to squeeze her hand reassuringly. "Besides, you look different now, tanned from the sun, dressed in those clothes. No one would connect you to the banker's daughter from Prescott." Flagstaff was indeed bustling, the streets crowded with wagons, riders, and pedestrians going about their business. Blake led them to a modest hotel on the edge of town, less likely to be frequented by travelers from Verde Springs or Prescott. "One room," he told the clerk, maintaining their cover as husband and wife. "For 2 nights. The clerk, a bored-looking young man with ink-stained fingers, barely glanced at them as he handed over a key. "Room 6, end of the hall upstairs. Breakfast served from 6 to 8. Their room was small but clean, with a single bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window. Blake set their bags down, then turned to Zara with a slightly awkward smile. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said, "or I can get another room if you'd prefer." Zara shook her head. "That would look suspicious for a married couple. The floor is fine." She paused, then added with a blush, "Unless." Blake crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "We agreed to wait," he reminded her gently. "And a hotel room in Flagstaff isn't how I want to start our life together." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "The floor it is." They spent the afternoon shopping for the supplies they needed. Blake purchased feed for the horses and replenished their traveling provisions, while Zara found a dressmaker who had several ready-made garments that could be quickly altered to fit her. She selected 2 practical dresses, undergarments, and a pair of sturdy boots that were a vast improvement over Blake's 2 large ones she had been wearing. As they were leaving the dressmaker's shop, Zara's heart nearly stopped. Across the street, posting a notice on the wall of the general store, was a man who looked eerily like Harold Blackburn. She clutched Blake's arm, her face draining of color. "What is it?" Blake asked, immediately alert. "That man," Zara whispered. "Across the street. He looks like Harold." Blake casually turned to look, his body partially shielding Zara from view. After a moment, he relaxed slightly. "It's not him," he said, his voice low. "Similar build and coloring, but definitely not Blackburn. Let's head back to the hotel anyway, just to be safe." Once in their room, Zara sank onto the bed, her hands trembling with delayed reaction. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought for sure it was him." Blake sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Don't apologize. It's natural to be watchful, especially so soon after what happened." Zara leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Will I always be looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows? I don't want to live that way, Blake." "You won't have to," Blake promised. "Either Blackburn will be brought to justice, or he'll believe you dead and move on. Either way, with time and distance, the fear will fade." "How can you be so sure?" Blake was quiet for a moment, his expression distant. "After the war, I had nightmares. For years. I'd wake up hearing gunfire, smelling powder, seeing the faces of men I'd killed or who died beside me." He looked down at her. "Time doesn't erase those memories, but it does dull their edges. You learn to live with them, to push them to the background of your mind." Zara had never considered that Blake might carry his own burdens, his own painful past. She reached up to touch his face, wishing she could erase the shadows she saw in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Blake caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "We all have our rivers to cross, Zara. What matters is that we keep swimming, keep fighting the current." That evening, they dined in the small restaurant attached to the hotel, maintaining their pretense as newlyweds traveling west. The food was simple but hearty, and the few other diners paid them little attention, much to Zara's relief. Returning to their room, Blake arranged blankets on the floor beside the bed while Zara changed into her new nightgown behind the privacy screen. When she emerged, Blake was already settled on his makeshift bed, his back to her out of respect for her modesty. "Blake," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. He rolled over to look up at her. "Yes, thank you. For today, for everything. I know this isn't easy, pretending to be married, sharing a room, all while keeping a proper distance." Blake sat up, his expression serious in the lamplight. "It's worth it. You're worth it, Zara. I want to do this right." Zara smiled, her heart full. "So do I." She leaned down and kissed him softly. "Good night." "Good night," Blake replied, watching as she slipped under the covers. Zara extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. As she listened to Blake's breathing slowly even out into sleep, she found herself thinking about the future, their future. They had spoken of courting, of building something real between them, but the practical aspects remained unclear. Would she stay at his ranch? Would they marry eventually? And what of Harold Blackburn? Could she truly leave that chapter of her life unresolved? These questions followed her into dreams where she was once again in the river, fighting the current. But this time, when strong arms pulled her from the water, she wasn't afraid of the man who held her and claimed her as his own. This time, she welcomed his embrace, knowing it meant safety, protection, and most of all, love. The next morning, they breakfasted early, planning to complete their remaining purchases and return to the hotel before the streets became too crowded. Blake needed supplies from the blacksmith for minor repairs at the ranch, and Zara wanted to visit the general store for household items. "We'll meet back here in 2 hours," Blake said as they parted outside the hotel. "Be careful." "I will," Zara promised, adjusting her hat to better shade her face. The general store was busy but not crowded, allowing Zara to browse without drawing attention. She selected fabric for curtains, needles and thread, and a few luxuries like coffee and sugar that Blake hadn't mentioned but she knew would be appreciated. As she waited for the shopkeeper to total her purchases, her eye was drawn to a notice board near the counter. There, among advertisements for cattle auctions and boarding houses, was a poster that made her blood run cold. It showed a crude sketch of a woman with dark hair, and beneath it the words, "Missing, Zara Blackburn, née Ellis, 22 years, last seen Verde Springs. Believed drowned but body not recovered. Husband offering reward for information." Zara quickly looked away, her heart pounding. Harold wasn't just searching the area around Verde Springs, he was spreading his net wider, still hunting for her. The shopkeeper, noticing her distress, followed her gaze to the poster. "Terrible business, that," he commented as he wrapped her purchases. "Young bride on her wedding day, no less. River's dangerous this time of year with the melt." Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. She paid for her items and hurried from the store, eager to find Blake and share this alarming development. She was so preoccupied that she didn't notice the man watching her from across the street, a man who had been in Verde Springs on the day of her wedding, who had attended the small reception as a business associate of her father's. By the time she reached the hotel, Zara had composed herself enough to walk calmly through the lobby. though her hands trembled as she unlocked the door to their room. Blake wasn't back yet, so she busied herself organizing their new supplies, trying not to think about the poster or what it meant for their safety. A knock at the door startled her. "Blake," she called, approaching cautiously. "Hotel staff, madam," came a male voice. "Clean towels." Zara hesitated, then opened the door a crack, keeping the chain latched. A young man in a hotel uniform stood in the hallway, holding a stack of folded linens. "Just leave them by the door, please," Zara said. "I'll get them in a moment." The young man nodded and set the towels down. As he straightened, he gave her an odd look. "Pardon me, madam, but haven't we met before? You look mighty familiar." Zara's heart skipped a beat. "No, I don't believe so. My husband and I are just passing through on our way to California." The young man frowned, clearly trying to place her. "Could have sworn." He shook his head. "My mistake. Enjoy your stay, madam." Zara closed the door, her back pressed against it as she tried to calm her racing pulse. It was time to leave Flagstaff immediately. They had what they needed, and every moment they remained increased the risk of discovery. When Blake returned 30 minutes later, she told him about both the poster and the encounter with the hotel employee. "He didn't recognize me for certain," she concluded, "but he might continue thinking about it, or mention it to someone else who knows me better." Blake nodded grimly. "We'll leave now. I've already settled our bill through tomorrow, so no one will think it's strange if we're not seen again until checkout time." He began gathering their belongings. "Did anyone else look at you strangely? Any sign that Blackburn himself might be in town?" "No, but that doesn't mean he isn't here, or won't be soon." The poster was new, the edges weren't curled or faded. They packed quickly, Blake checking the hallway before they slipped out with their bags. Instead of leaving through the main entrance, they used a side door that led to the alley where the horses were stabled. Blake paid the stable boy extra to have their mounts saddled immediately, and within 20 minutes, they were riding out of Flagstaff by a less traveled road, heading south toward home. They rode hard until sunset, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the town. When they finally made camp in a sheltered grove of pines, both were exhausted but relieved to be away from the potential danger. "What now?" Zara asked as they sat by the fire, eating a simple meal of jerky and biscuits. "If Harold is extending his search this far north." "We need to consider our options," Blake said, his expression thoughtful. "We could continue as we have been, with you staying at the ranch out of sight. But if Blackburn is this determined to find you, that may not be safe forever. Or we could take a more permanent solution. Leave the territory entirely, start fresh somewhere he'd never think to look." Blake looked at her, his eyes serious. "California, perhaps, or Oregon. I could sell the ranch, buy land elsewhere." Zara was stunned. "You would do that? Give up everything you've built?" "Land is just land," Blake said simply. "What matters to me is right here." He reached across the space between them to take her hand. "But before we make any decisions that drastic, there's another option we should consider." "What's that?" "We could go to the territorial authorities. Not the local sheriff, but higher up. Present the evidence of what Blackburn did to you. Seek justice through official channels." Zara considered this. "What evidence do we have? It's my word against his, and he's a respected businessman while I'm a drowned bride who ran away with another man." Blake sighed, acknowledging the truth of her words. "Then maybe it's time to create some evidence. Set a trap, get him to admit what he did." "That's dangerous, Blake. If something went wrong." "It's a risk," he agreed. "But so is spending our lives looking over our shoulders." He squeezed her hand. "Whatever we decide together. Your safety comes first, always." That night, as Zara lay in the small tent while Blake kept watch by the fire, she thought about the choices before them. Running away would mean freedom from Harold, but at the cost of Blake's ranch and the life he had built. Staying and hiding might work for a while, but for how long? And confronting Harold directly was fraught with danger. There seemed to be no perfect solution, no clear path forward that didn't involve sacrifice or risk. Yet despite the uncertainty, Zara felt a strange calm. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. She had Blake's strong, steady Blake, who had pulled her from the river and, in doing so, had given her not just life but a reason to live it fully. With that thought comforting her, Zara finally drifted into sleep, dreaming not of raging waters but of still pools reflecting endless blue skies the same color as Blake's eyes when he looked at her with love. They reached Blake's ranch 2 days later, relieved to find everything in order. Thomas, the young man who had watched the place in their absence, reported no visitors or unusual occurrences, much to their relief. "Thank you for looking after things," Blake said, pressing payment into Thomas's hand. "If anyone asks, you haven't seen us." Thomas nodded, understanding the gravity of the request without needing details. "Yes, sir. My pa always says the less a man knows, the less he can tell." After Thomas departed, Blake and Zara settled back into the cabin, unpacking their purchases from Flagstaff and discussing their next steps. The journey had given them time to consider their options, and they had reached a tentative decision. "We'll stay here for now," Blake said as they sat at the table that evening, "but we'll prepare for the possibility of leaving quickly if needed. I'll speak with Joe about finding a buyer for the ranch, just in case." Zara nodded, though the thought of Blake giving up his home for her safety still troubled her. "And in the meantime, we live our lives," Blake said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I meant what I said about courting you properly, Zara. I want to show you what a real relationship can be, built on respect and care and choice." Zara smiled, turning her hand to lace her fingers with his. "I'd like that." The following weeks settled into a new pattern. Blake taught Zara more about running the ranch, and she proved an apt pupil, quickly learning to manage the household tasks and even helping with the livestock. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, reading or talking, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to hopes for the future. Each day, their bond deepened, founded on mutual respect and growing affection. Blake was unfailingly patient, never pushing for more than Zara was ready to give, though the attraction between them was a constant, thrilling undercurrent to their interactions. Joe returned from town with periodic reports. Harold Blackburn had extended his search, posting rewards in towns throughout the territory, but had not yet come to Verde Springs in person again. Zara's father, according to gossip, had accepted the story of his daughter's tragic drowning and had returned to his business affairs with little outward sign of grief. "Does that hurt?" Blake asked one evening when Joe had delivered this particular piece of news. "Knowing your father believes you dead and doesn't seem greatly affected by it." Zara considered the question as she mended one of Blake's shirts by the fire. "I thought it would," she said finally. "But it only confirms what I've long suspected, that I was more of an obligation to him than a beloved daughter. In a way, it's freeing. I can build a new life without feeling I've abandoned someone who truly needed me." Blake watched her, admiration clear in his eyes. "You're remarkable, Zara Ellis." "Do you know that?" She looked up from her sewing, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Why do you say that?" "Because most people would be crushed by what you've endured, the betrayal, the attempt on your life, the loss of your family and home. Yet here you are, finding strength in it, looking forward instead of back." "I have reason to look forward now," Zara said softly. She set aside her sewing and moved to sit beside him on the bench by the fire. "I have you." Blake's arm went around her, drawing her close against his side. Yes, you do. Always. Zara tilted her face up to his, and their lips met in a kiss that started gently but quickly deepened, fueled by weeks of growing desire. Blake's hand came up to cradle her face, his touch reverent as his mouth moved against hers. Zara wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer, wanting more of him, all of him. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Blake rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as he fought for control. "I should stop," he murmured, "if we keep going." "What if I don't want to stop?" Zara whispered, her heart racing. "What if I'm ready for more?" Blake pulled back slightly to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure? We agreed to wait to do this right." "I've never been more sure of anything," Zara said with quiet certainty. "I love you, Blake Adams. I want to be with you in every way." Blake's expression softened at her words. "I love you too, Zara, more than I thought possible." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But there's something I need to ask you first." Zara's breath caught as Blake stood, then knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "Zara Ellis, will you marry me? Not for protection or convenience, but because I love you and want to spend my life with you." Tears of joy filled Zara's eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Blake Adams." Blake's smile was radiant as he rose, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. Their kiss was filled with promise of passion, of commitment, of a future together that neither had dared to imagine before they found each other. That night, Blake made a bed for himself on the floor as usual, though it took all his willpower to honor the boundary they had maintained since her arrival. "One more thing to do right," he told her with a rueful smile. "Once we're properly married, I won't be sleeping on this floor again." Zara laughed, though she felt the same sweet anticipation. "Then let's not wait too long." They decided on a simple ceremony to be performed by the circuit preacher who visited Verde Springs once a month. Joe would stand as witness, along with Dr. Mitchell, who had kept their secret faithfully. The challenge would be ensuring that news of the wedding didn't reach Harold Blackburn, who was still searching for his missing bride. "We'll use my mother's maiden name for you," Blake suggested as they planned. "Zara Martin. Just for the certificate, until we can sort out the legal tangle with Blackburn." Zara agreed, though she longed for the day when she could openly use the name she would share with Blake Adams, a name she would choose freely, with love. 2 weeks later, on a clear June morning, Zara stood beside Blake in the main room of their cabin, which had been swept and decorated with wildflowers for the occasion. She wore one of the new dresses from Flagstaff, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Blake was in his best shirt, his hair still damp from washing, his face freshly shaved. The preacher, a kind elderly man named Reverend Thompson, performed a brief but heartfelt ceremony. Joe and Dr. Mitchell stood witness, both men beaming with approval as Blake and Zara exchanged vows and simple rings that Blake had purchased through Joe. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson declared. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Adams." Blake drew Zara into his arms, his kiss tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they parted, both were smiling, their joy too great to contain. After a celebratory meal prepared by Joe, the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone in the cabin that was now truly their home. Blake locked the door, then turned to Zara, his expression a mixture of love and desire. "Mrs. Adams," he said softly, crossing to her and taking her hands in his. "Mr. Adams," she replied, her heart full to bursting. Blake lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed, their bed now, laying her down gently before stretching out beside her. "I've dreamed of this moment," he confessed, tracing the line of her jaw with his finger. "Of being able to hold you all night, to wake up beside you in the morning." "So have I," Zara admitted, reaching up to draw him down for a kiss. Their lovemaking was tender and unhurried, Blake guiding Zara through her first experience with infinite patience and care. When they finally came together completely, it was with a sense of rightness, of completion, that brought tears to Zara's eyes. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness, Zara rested her head on Blake's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Happy?" Blake asked, his fingers playing with her hair. "Perfectly," Zara replied. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "When I pulled you from that river, I had no idea I was saving my own future happiness along with your life." Zara smiled against his skin. "Perhaps it was fate." "Perhaps," Blake agreed. "Or perhaps it was simply that we were both due for some good fortune after all we'd been through." Whatever the reason, as they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, both felt a profound sense of gratitude for the currents that had brought them together, a deadly river and a rescuing hand, forming the unlikely beginning of a love that would last a lifetime. Summer faded into fall, and fall gave way to winter. Blake and Zara settled into married life with a naturalness that surprised them both, as if they had been meant to share this life all along. The ranch prospered under their joint care, with Blake teaching Zara everything he knew about the land and the livestock. Joe continued to bring news from town, keeping them informed of Harold Blackburn's movements. As the months passed with no sign of Zara, the search had gradually diminished, though Blackburn had not left the territory as they had hoped. Instead, he had established himself more permanently in Verde Springs, apparently having found financial backing from somewhere to cover his debts. "He's buying property now," Joe reported one December evening as they sat around the fire. "Got himself a stake in the new mine they're opening east of town." Blake's expression darkened. "So he's not leaving?" "Doesn't look that way," Joe confirmed. "But he stopped talking about his missing bride, at least in public. Most folks think he's accepted she's dead." Zara, who had been sewing by the fire, set her work aside. "We can't live in hiding forever, Blake. Sooner or later I'll need to go into town. We need to resolve this somehow." Blake nodded, having come to the same conclusion himself. "We do. And I think I have an idea how." The next day, after Joe had returned to town, Blake outlined his plan to Zara. It was risky, but if successful, it would free them from the shadow of Harold Blackburn once and for all. "We need evidence of what he did to you," Blake explained. "Something that can't be denied or explained away, if we can get him to admit it to someone other than us." "But how?" Zara asked. "He'd never confess to attempted murder, especially not to me or anyone associated with me." "Not knowingly, no. But what if he thought he was speaking to someone who already knew? Someone he thought was an accomplice?" Zara frowned, trying to follow Blake's thinking. "What do you mean?" "Joe told me Blackburn frequents the saloon in Verde Springs most evenings. Drinks heavily, especially when business is going poorly. What if a stranger approached him there? Someone claiming to have seen what happened that day at the river, someone threatening to expose him unless paid for their silence." Understanding dawned on Zara's face. "A blackmailer." "You think he would admit what he did to someone blackmailing him?" "People often reveal their guilt when they think they're speaking to someone who already knows it," Blake said. "It's worth trying. The territorial marshal is a good man from what I've heard. If we can get evidence of Blackburn's crime, he'll act on it, regardless of Blackburn's standing in the community." Zara considered the plan, seeing both its potential and its dangers. "Who would approach him?" "Not you. He might have seen you in town before, or heard descriptions of the rancher whose hand went missing around the same time his bride disappeared." No, not me, Blake agreed. I was thinking of asking Thomas. He's young but steady, and Blackburn wouldn't know him. His family's ranch is on the other side of the territory. It's dangerous, Blake. If Blackburn suspects a trap, Thomas won't be alone. I'll be there, watching from a distance. And we'll have the marshal nearby, ready to intervene if needed. Zara stood, pacing the small cabin as she considered. The idea of confronting Harold, even indirectly, filled her with dread. Yet the alternative, continuing to live in the shadows, always looking over their shoulders, was equally unpalatable. All right, she said finally, but I want to be there too. Blake shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. If Blackburn sees you, he won't, Zara insisted. I'll be careful, stay out of sight. But I need to be there, Blake. I need to see him brought to justice with my own eyes. Blake looked as though he wanted to argue further, but something in Zara's expression stopped him. We'll figure out a way to keep you safe, he conceded. But at the first sign of trouble, you leave. Promise me. I promise, Zara said, relieved that he understood her need for closure. The plan took shape over the following weeks. Thomas agreed to help, his youthful face showing no fear at the prospect of confronting a would-be murderer. Joe arranged a meeting with the territorial marshal, Walter Reed, who listened to their story with growing concern. If what you say is true, Mrs. Adams, this Blackburn fellow belongs behind bars, Marshal Reed said. But your husband is right, we need more than your word against his. The trap might work, if Blackburn is as arrogant as you describe. With the marshal's cautious approval, they set a date in early February when Blake and Zara could travel to Verde Springs without attracting attention amid the usual traffic of ranchers coming to town for supplies. The night before their departure, Blake held Zara close in their bed, his concern evident in the tension of his body. We don't have to do this, he said softly. We could still leave, start fresh somewhere else. Zara shook her head against his chest. No, this is our home now. I don't want to run away, always wondering if he'll find us. I want this finished, Blake. Blake pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then we'll finish it, together. They rode into Verde Springs the following afternoon, taking a roundabout route to avoid being seen. The marshal had arranged for them to use a room above the general store, which had a clear view of the saloon across the street. Thomas was already there, being briefed by Marshal Reed on exactly what to say to Blackburn. Keep it simple, the marshal advised. Say you were passing through town that day, saw him at the river with his bride. Imply that you know what he did without stating it directly. Let him fill in the blanks himself. Thomas nodded, his young face serious. And if he denies it, express disbelief. Say something like, "Come on, mister, I saw you push her in. I'm not here to judge, just to get what's mine." Make him think you're only interested in money, not justice. When darkness fell, they took their positions. Thomas entered the saloon while Blake, Zara, Marshal Reed, and a deputy watched from the room across the street. Through the windows of the saloon, they could see Harold Blackburn at his usual table, already well into his evening's drinking. Zara's heart pounded as she caught her first glimpse of the man who had tried to kill her. He looked much as she remembered, handsome in a conventional way, well-dressed, with an air of entitlement that was visible even at a distance. The sight of him brought back the terror of that day at the river, and she unconsciously moved closer to Blake, who put a protective arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to watch," he murmured. "Yes, I do," Zara replied, her voice steady despite her fear. Through the window, they saw Thomas approach Blackburn's table. The young man leaned down, said something that made Blackburn's head snap up in surprise, then took a seat across from him. The conversation that followed was tense, Blackburn's face cycling through shock, anger, and calculation. After about 10 minutes, Thomas stood and walked out of the saloon as planned. Blackburn followed a moment later, looking around furtively before approaching Thomas in the alley, beside the building exactly where the marshal had suggested Thomas lead him, away from witnesses, but still visible from their vantage point. Marshal Reed produced a spyglass, focusing it on the two men. "I need to hear what they're saying," he muttered, "but I can't risk getting closer without being seen." "Let me go," Zara said suddenly. "I can get close enough." "No," Blake said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "I'll stay in the shadows," Zara insisted. "He won't be looking for me. He thinks I'm dead, and I know how to move quietly." The marshal considered her suggestion. She might be right. Blackburn will be focused on Thomas, not on his surroundings, and we need that confession. Blake looked torn but finally nodded. "Be careful. At the first sign of trouble, I'll run," Zara promised, squeezing his hand before slipping out of the room. She made her way downstairs and out the back of the general store, keeping to the shadows as she crossed to the alley where Thomas and Blackburn stood arguing. The buildings on either side created a natural channel for sound, allowing her to hear their conversation clearly from her hiding place behind a stack of crates. "Don't know what you're talking about," Blackburn was saying, though his voice lacked conviction. "Sure you do," Thomas replied easily. "Like I said, I was crossing the bridge upstream when I saw you and your bride by the river, saw you arguing, saw you push her in, saw you watch as she was swept away." "That's a lie," Blackburn hissed. "She fell. It was an accident." Thomas laughed softly. "Come on, mister. We both know that's not true. I saw your face when you did it. You meant for her to drown." There was a long silence, and Zara held her breath, praying that Blackburn would incriminate himself. "What do you want?" Blackburn finally asked, his voice lower now, more dangerous. "Just what's fair," Thomas said. $500 and I'll forget what I saw. Otherwise, I might have to talk to the marshal." "500, Blackburn sputtered. "You're insane. I don't have that kind of money." "That's not what I hear. Word is you've got a stake in the new mine." "Surely a man like you can come up with 500 to keep his neck out of a noose." Another silence, longer this time. When Blackburn spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming almost confidential. "You know why I did it, don't you? She lied to me. Her father promised a dowry, enough to clear my debts and then some. But there was nothing, not a cent. What was I supposed to do? Let her ruin me?" Zara's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. There it was, the confession they needed, spoken clearly enough for her to hear every damning word. "So you decided to kill her instead," Thomas said, not a question but a statement. "I decided to cut my losses," Blackburn corrected coldly. "She was worthless to me alive. At least her death would buy me sympathy, maybe an extension on my loans, and it worked until you showed up." "Well, now you have a choice," Thomas said. "Pay me or face the consequences." Blackburn seemed to consider this for a moment. Then, so quickly that Zara almost missed it, he reached inside his coat and pulled out a pistol. "I have a better idea," he said, his voice suddenly hard. "I'll make sure there are no witnesses this time." Everything happened at once. Zara screamed a warning to Thomas, who dove to the side as Blackburn fired. Marshal Reed and his deputy burst from the general store, guns drawn. Blake was right behind them, racing toward Zara as Blackburn, hearing her voice, turned in her direction with a look of pure shock. "You," he gasped, raising his gun toward her. Blake reached Zara just as Blackburn fired again, shielding her with his body. The bullet went wide, embedding itself in a wooden post as Marshal Reed tackled Blackburn to the ground, disarming him. "Harold Blackburn, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Zara Ellis and the attempted murder of Thomas Miller," the marshal declared, hauling the struggling man to his feet, "as well as assault with a deadly weapon and attempted witness intimidation. She's supposed to be dead." Blackburn shouted, staring at Zara with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You were dead." "Not quite," Zara said, stepping forward with Blake's arm protectively around her waist. "Though not for lack of trying on your part." The marshal's deputy snapped handcuffs on Blackburn's wrists. "We heard every word of your confession, Blackburn. You'll hang for this." As they led Blackburn away, still shouting threats and denials, Blake pulled Zara into his arms, holding her tightly. "Are you all right?" "When I heard that shot, I'm fine," Zara assured him, though she was trembling from the confrontation. "We did it, Blake. It's over." Thomas joined them, shaken but uninjured. "That was closer than I'd have liked," he admitted with a nervous laugh. "But it worked. We got him." The marshal returned after securing Blackburn in the town jail. "He'll stand trial next month when the circuit judge comes through," he informed them. "With your testimony and his confession, which both my deputy and I witnessed, there's no doubt he'll be convicted." "What about my legal status?" Zara asked. "Technically, I'm still married to him, aren't I? Under the circumstances, I'd say that marriage was null and void from the start," Marshal Reed said. "But yes, you'll need to file for a formal annulment or divorce. The judge can handle that when he hears the criminal case." "And my marriage to Blake," Zara pressed. "Is it legal?" The marshal smiled kindly. "Love and commitment make a marriage, Mrs. Adams. The rest is just paperwork, which we'll sort out in due time." Later that night, safely back at the ranch with Thomas and Joe celebrating their success, Blake took Zara aside to the quiet of their bedroom. "Are you truly all right?" he asked, searching her face. Seeing him again, hearing him admit what he did. Zara considered the question seriously. "I am," she said finally. "There's a freedom in knowing he can't hurt me anymore, that he'll face justice for what he did. I feel like I can finally put that chapter of my life behind me and focus on our future." Blake smiled, drawing her into his arms. "Our future," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Zara said, reaching up to kiss him softly. As winter gave way to spring, justice took its course. Harold Blackburn was tried and convicted of attempted murder, sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. The judge also granted Zara an annulment, declaring her marriage to Blackburn void on grounds of fraud and criminal intent, and formally recognized her subsequent marriage to Blake. Free at last from the shadow that had hung over them, Blake and Zara threw themselves into building their life together. The ranch flourished under their care, expanding as they purchased adjacent land and increased their herd. Joe remained with them, like family now, and they hired additional hands as the operation grew. In the fall of that year, Zara discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled Blake with a joy he could barely contain, and he spent the following months alternating between protective hovering and excited preparation for the baby's arrival. "It's a miracle," he told Zara one evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, expanded now into a proper house with multiple rooms. His hand rested on her growing belly, feeling the baby kick beneath his palm. "After everything, to have found this happiness with you." Zara covered his hand with her own. "Do you ever think about that day, when you found me in the river?" "Often," Blake admitted. "I dream about it, sometimes only in the dreams. I don't reach you in time." He shuddered at the thought. "I wake up reaching for you, needing to know you're safe beside me." "I'm not going anywhere," Zara promised, leaning against him. "Except maybe to the bedroom. Your son or daughter is pressing on my bladder again." Blake laughed, helping her to her feet. "Come on, then. Let's get you inside before it gets too chilly out here." Their daughter, Emma, was born on a clear April morning in 1880, with Dr. Mitchell attending and Blake holding Zara's hand throughout her labor. The baby had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. "She's beautiful," Blake whispered, cradling his daughter with a tenderness that brought tears to Zara's eyes. Just like her mother. As Emma grew, so did their family and their ranch. A son, James, joined them 2 years later, followed by another daughter, Sarah, the year after that. The Adams Ranch became known throughout the territory for its fine horses and cattle, and Blake and Zara were respected members of the community in Verde Springs, where they eventually felt safe enough to visit regularly. Zara never saw her father again, though she wrote to him once to let him know she was alive and well. He never replied, and she accepted that some bridges could not be rebuilt. Instead, she focused on the family she had created with Blake, ensuring their children grew up surrounded by love and support. 10 years after Blake had pulled Zara from the raging Verde River, they stood together on the bank of that same river, now tamed by drought to a gentle flow. Their children played nearby, supervised by Joe, who at 65 was still an integral part of their lives. "Does it bother you?" Blake asked, his arm around Zara's waist. "Being here again?" Zara shook her head, leaning into his embrace. "No, it's just a river now. The memories don't have power over me anymore." Blake pressed a kiss to her temple. "You know, I never did explain properly what I meant that day when I said you were mine." Zara looked up at him, smiling. "I think I figured it out eventually." "I'd like to tell you anyway," Blake said, turning her to face him. "What I meant was that in that moment, pulling you from the water, I felt like I'd found something I didn't even know I was missing, like a piece of my soul had been returned to me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch as tender now as it had been on that first day. "I didn't know it then, but I was claiming my future, my happiness, my love." Tears filled Zara's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "And I was finding mine," she said softly, "even though I was too frightened to recognize it at the time." Blake gathered her close, and they stood together by the river that had nearly taken her life, but had instead given them both a new one together. Behind them, their children laughed in the sunshine, a testament to the love that had grown from that desperate moment when a bride was tossed into a raging river, and a cowboy carried her out, claiming her as his own.